July holiday, primary schools will reopen for full-time, face-to-face teaching. In other words, children at primary schools will be going to school every day, rather than every second day or every second week. But still no decision about high schools. Meanwhile, teachers will be vaccinated from tomorrow. 500,000 teachers should now be vaccinated literally in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Professor Nick Spall is an associate professor at the Research on Socio-Economic Policy at the University of Stellenbosch. Professor Chika Sehole is the Dean of Education at the University of Pretoria. Professor Spall, if I may start with you, you've been conducting a lot of research on this. How much education have our children lost during this time when they're only going to school every second day or every second week?
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. So I think the important thing to emphasize is that the learning losses that were experienced in 2020 haven't stopped. So although the schools are now open, children are only attending school every second day, and in some instances in Limpopo, for example, it's every third day. So the learning losses in 2020 were 50 to 75% of a year of learning. So that means that the average child in 2020 learned, in some instances, only a quarter of what they would normally learn. And if we continue those projections until June of 2021, it means that the average grade 3 child in 2021 knows the same as the average grade 2 child from 2019. So it's almost an entire year of learning that has been lost, and is extremely unlikely that that would be made up through any kind of catch-up efforts.
Well, I mean, it would almost be worth doing the whole year again. I mean, we can't have that either. That wouldn't work either, would it?
No, it wouldn't. But I think that what it does do is it emphasizes the fact that these learning losses are ongoing. And that, as you mentioned, high schools, the question about what's going to happen to high schools at the end of July is currently undecided. But all schools should be reopened in their entirety at the end of July, particularly if all teachers are vaccinated. But even if teachers are not fully vaccinated, and we don't know if we can trust the Department of Basic Education or the Department of Health's timeframes, but even if they're not, we know that schools are not sites of spread, and that isolated instances of schools having clusters or outbreaks, those schools should be closed rather than closing all 23,000 schools or causing children to go to school only every second day.
Professor Sehole, do you agree with that assessment? It's just impossible to make up an entire year for almost every child in our education system.
Yes, I tend to agree with it. And what one needs to understand is what it takes for one to take the learners through the curriculum. Every day that is lost in terms of teaching and learning is a time that is difficult to recoup or to recover. So the amount of time that has been lost, which is no problem of any person, but it's because of the situation of the pandemic that is upon us, it will be difficult for us to recover, and that's why any early opportunity to have learners back in the schools will be welcome.
Professor Sehole, I mean, the obvious thing you might say is to say, well, look, let's have a look at the school day. Let's have a look at the school holiday system. We can have more days at school. We can reduce the holidays. We can make children stay maybe 2 hours later each day. They, maybe are at school for 7 hours a day. Maybe we can make that 8 or 9 hours. But I'd imagine the law of diminishing returns would come in. You can try and make a child go to school for 9 hours a day. There's no way you can make them sit still for that long.
Of course, that's true, Stephen, and I think that going forward, when learners come back to school, even if we put in place catch-up, plans. Remember that this problem is not. We are not sitting with this problem from the beginning of this year. This is a problem which we carried over from the previous year. So I think once the teachers have been, inoculated, and we've got certainty in terms of safety on the part of teachers, we need to put in place proper recovery plans, which I think cannot be done in 1 year. The department was estimating that it's going to take about up to 3 years to recover lost time of the past year. We are now half of the year into this academic year, and we have lost even more time. Like Nick was saying, in Limpopo, I've got a school principal friend who was telling me that there are some grades that have been attending once a week, which means that in the first term of the year, learners were only in schools for 9 days. How do you cover and catch up on that? It's a challenge, but as I'm saying, every early opportunity to have learners back in schools with teachers, putting in place recovery plans will be welcome.
Professor Spall, I mean, the next thing the next problem is that no matter what recovery plan you have, the outcome of that recovery plan is probably going to mirror our education system. And I'm talking about inequality. In other words, the recovery plan will probably be implemented the best in places where children suffered the least. So children with the most resources behind them, middle-class children in suburban schools, probably got the most education during this time, and those schools probably would implement a recovery plan better than, let's use the example again, a school in Limpopo that doesn't have those resources.
So we know that is the case. We don't need to speculate because fee-charging schools, private schools and Model C schools are already, the majority of them are completely fully open again. So if you're attending a fee-charging school, chances are that your children are going back to school Monday to Friday without rotational timetables, whereas if your child is attending a no-fee school, chances are that they're only attending every second day. And you're right in saying that whatever catch-up programs we end up implementing are likely to be more effective in schools that are better resourced, have lower class sizes, have more technology. There are lots of other reasons why we might think those might be more successful. So I think it would be the right conclusion that the COVID-19 pandemic and the aftermath of that is likely to increase inequality in South Africa. And I think that we also can't just talk of catch-up as if it's something that happens just by reopening schools. If you look internationally, there are huge programs that cost hundreds of billions of dollars that are being implemented. We're not allocating additional resources and money towards things like tutors or teaching assistants over a long period of time. If they're talking about 3 years as a period of recovery, that's the period that they would need teaching assistants in all South African schools, for example. And those teaching assistants would also need to be trained in order to offer support. That's not plans that we're seeing anytime soon.
Professor Sole, I mean, is this one of those moments, and I mean, I'm sure this pressure is going to come, where it allows us to have a big conversation around the kind of school system that we actually need? Now, the risk is that for some people, it'll just be better to get kids through the system. Lower the standards will be the complaint. For others, it'll be a chance to say, well, let's change everything. And yet I don't think we have the capacity to do that either.
Well, it's a big challenge, and as you know, this is something which we inherited from the past. Unfortunately, despite government investing a lot of money, because we must indicate the fact that that there are a lot of resources that are invested in education. However, the inequalities remain unresolved. So and COVID did not help the situation. So going forward, I think, we will need to rethink, the best way of really dealing and taking a serious, attack at these inequalities that are there in the system, so that in future, when we have got such situations, we don't find, some sectors of society severely impacted upon, like it is the case at the moment.
Professor Sole, I mean, again, there's a whole conversation around online education. I think some people saw that this would make a big change. I don't know if it is. I mean, can we do more of that? I mean, I know people who are my age who still talk with great fondness about watching certain teachers on television, 20 years ago and how they helped them through matric. I don't know if that really is as effective as some people think it is.
Well, where resources are available, it is effective. Actually, it is a better way of dealing with the current challenges that we are having than having nothing at the moment. But I still believe that there is nothing that can replace a teacher in the classroom. So despite the efficacy of online learning at the moment, I think when the system opens up, even though we may not go back to full contact education in some schools, but teachers will still need teachers to mediate teaching and learning in the schools.
Professor Spall, I mean, teachers now are going to get vaccinated literally from tomorrow. They're going to be vaccinated, in fact, ahead of South African National Defence Force soldiers, ahead of police officers. What does that say about our society? Does that suggest that we give teachers a particular value and that we're doing the right thing? Does it suggest that government is desperate to get schools open? Does it make any other suggestions? Do you think that this will make it very hard for anyone to oppose schools being open for the rest of the year?
I think probably all of those things, and probably also that the teachers are better unionized than the police officials. Because I think that the things that are preventing schools from being reopened, some of them are legitimate concerns by teachers and parents about not wanting to send their children back to school. But as we know, when schools were open, all parents sent their children back to school. 95% of parents are sending their children to school. They want their kids to go to school, even though there are high levels of worry. We also know from teacher mortality data using payroll data from 2020, which is extremely accurate, that teacher deaths, excess teacher deaths, follow the trends of excess deaths in South Africa at large, not the opening and closing dates of schools. There's no relationship between when schools were closed and opened and infection rates and deaths amongst teachers. So I think that the main reason why teachers are being prioritized is that the department and presidency believe that if they are vaccinated, schools will be able to reopen completely, which is in the best interests of children. And that's one of the reasons why I'm fully supportive of teachers being vaccinated. And I think that if there are additional things that signal to society that teachers play an incredibly important role and raise their status, all the better.
In the end, Professor Sehole, the concern is that this is going to be a problem which we live with. And the risk really is that we lose an entire generation of young people, that they receive an inferior education to the people who went before them and an inferior education to the people who come after them. So, Professor Sehole, what I'm saying is this means that we could have a group of people who, through no fault of their own, just never have the same opportunity the rest of society has. And this will be held against them for the rest of their lives.
Well, and this is an unfortunate situation and reality which we've got to face, Stephen. And I think it's not only, and this does not only affect teaching, but it also, or does not only affect education, it affects the whole sector of society. Look at what is happening to the economy. You know, the economy, global economy has been affected. National economy has been affected. So rather than, you know, and it's something that we cannot point fingers to anybody. And you are right. We will be raising a generation that would have been disadvantaged compared to other generations before it, as a result of something that was outside, you know, the control of anybody at this time, at the time that we are living in.
Professor, I do appreciate the time. Professor Chika Sehole from the University of Pretoria, Associate Professor Nick Spall at the University of Stellenbosch on this education issue. Thank you very much indeed. One of the most important conversations within our society. High schools, we still don't know when they'll go back to full-time, face-to-face education and teaching.